crisis is inexcusable. Right now, Texas and other border states are being overwhelmed by thousands upon thousands of illegal immigrants who are flooding into small communities monthly. Our inaction, the inaction of the United States Congress, leaves these communities responsible for paying for where these illegal immigrants will stay, for how they will receive medical care, and for where they will go when they are released. From Brownsville to McAllen, to Laredo, to Eagle Pass, to Del Rio, to El Paso, and beyond, Texas communities are at their breaking point in terms of resources and manpower in dealing with this crisis. I am hearing this from elected officials throughout South Texas, Democrats and Republicans. The crisis has reached a breaking point. Our hardworking Border Patrol agents are also struggling with the enormous influx of illegal immigrants. It's been reported that there are now more illegal immigrants in custody than Border Patrol agents on the southern border, and thousands more being apprehended daily. Since last October, over 500,000 illegal immigrants have been apprehended at our southern border, many of them having traveled through Mexico from El Salvador, from Honduras, and Guatemala. Over 200,000 of these illegal immigrants were single adults. Over 56,000 of them were unaccompanied children. During this time, the Border Patrol also apprehended nearly 700 gang members trying to illegally enter the United States. In the month of May alone, the Border Patrol apprehended over 144,000 people coming through the southern border, 144,000 in a single month. If that pace were to continue for a year, we would be looking at nearly 2 million apprehensions in just 1 year. That's a staggering number of illegal immigrants for Texas and other border states to take in. Instead of acknowledging that this crisis exists, instead of doing the responsible thing and taking action, congressional Democrats instead have stubbornly clung to open border fantasies. Speaker Pelosi has called the hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants coming through our border a, quote, manufactured crisis. Some of our colleagues on the presidential trail have called it a, quote, fake crisis and, quote, fear-mongering of the worst kind, or have said that climate change is a more serious crisis. All that I can tell them is, go to the border. The crisis at the border is very real, despite what the Democratic talking points say. Last week, I visited the Rio Grande Valley, as I have done many times in representing the state of Texas in the U.S. Senate. I toured the Rio Grande Valley Centralized Processing Center, the largest immigration processing center in the United States. I also traveled to Rincon Village, which is ground zero for illegal border crossings near Mission, Texas. What I saw there was staggering. When I was in the Rio Grande Valley, the RJV sector chief told me that in 2014, just 5 years ago, roughly 2% of single adult men crossing illegally into the Rio Grande Valley had a child with them. Today, that number is roughly 50%. 2% all the way up to 50%. The word is out among traffickers, among smugglers, among others seeking to illegally enter the United States, that coming with a child is a get-out-of-jail-free pass. According to the Border Patrol, family unit apprehensions have increased by 463% since last year, with increases of 2,100% in El Paso and 1,034% in Del Rio. I also learned of a recent pilot program that used rapid DNA tests to discover whether these family units were real. Nearly 30% were found to be fraudulent in the Rio Grande Valley. In other words, the adults bringing kids into the United States illegally weren't related to the children. This is one of the most tragic elements of the crisis. The number of children who are being trafficked, who are being physically abused, sexually abused, and neglected. Often they're being used as pawns. But that's not all. The Rio Grande Valley, 60% of Border Patrol agents are now helping to process and care for children and family units. That means only 40% are dedicated to border security. More than half the Border Patrol agents in our nation's busiest crossing point for illegal immigrants are not on the border stopping narcotics traffickers, stopping human traffickers, because they are instead changing diapers. They are instead caring for children because the volume is so massive. Just recently, the Rio Grande Valley sector canceled their horseback patrol because they lack the manpower, because they're instead caring for the massive influx of illegal immigrants. On average, they make 30 trips to the hospital a day. On average, in the Rio Grande Valley sector, one child is born each day to an illegal immigrant who has come over. Last week, 12 people died. This is a crisis. And by refusing to address our border crisis, we invite child smuggling and child abuse. That's shameful, and that is a tragedy. We know how many illegal immigrants are being apprehended. We know that more and more illegal immigrants are trying to get into our country, and we know that Border Patrol doesn't have the manpower or the resources to handle a humanitarian crisis at this scale. It's a fact. And it is a reality that our Democratic colleagues need to face. Nobody who is compassionate, nobody who wants to be virtuous, nobody who cares about other human beings would want to perpetuate what is happening at the border for even a single day. We should be angry. We should be angry at politicians who say this is a made-up crisis. We should be angry at politicians who keep the loopholes in place that ensure that more and more children, more and more little boys, more and more little girls will be abused at the hands of human smugglers. While the passage of the $4.5 billion border supplemental bill a few weeks ago was a good first step, Democrats in Congress need to finally do their job and work with Republicans and work with President Trump to secure our border. We need to build a wall. We need to enforce immigration laws already on the books. We need to reform our amnesty laws to prevent asylum abuse. And we need to support the brave men and women of the Border Patrol with all the resources they need to effectively secure the border. I've introduced legislation to secure the border using the billions from El Chapo's criminal fortune that the Department of Justice is seeking to criminally forfeit, to use El Chapo's ill-gotten goods and those of other drug lords, use those billions to build the wall. The El Chapo Act would reserve any amounts criminally forfeited to the federal government as a result of the criminal prosecution of El Chapo or other drug kingpins for the building of a border wall and other border security assets. I'm also a co-sponsor of the WALLS Act, which would fully fund the border wall by closing existing loopholes that provide illegal immigrants with federal benefits and tax credits, all without affecting the benefits and tax credits used by American citizens. These bills are just two common-sense ways to secure the border. And everyone should support taking money away from murderers, from drug smugglers, from human traffickers such as El Chapo, and using it to prevent murder and drug smuggling and human trafficking. All without costing American taxpayers even a dime. or adding anything to the federal deficit. We also need more judges. We need to close the loopholes in our asylum system. Right now, immigration courts have a backlog of about 900,000 pending cases. Nearly 1 million. Increasing the number of immigration judges and providing an expedited process for asylum claims is necessary so that migrants who don't qualify for asylum can be quickly returned to their home countries rather than released into the United States. These reforms are necessary, and they need to happen. Mr. President, we know how to solve this problem. We don't have to ask theoretically because we've seen it happen. Specifically, in the first 6 months of 2017, right after President Trump was elected and sworn into office, illegal immigration dropped nearly 70%. It plummeted. I remember going back down to the valley in early 2017, asking the Border Patrol agents, why did the illegal crossings drop? We hadn't built a wall yet. We hadn't hired new Border Patrol agents. What changed? And, Mr. President, what those Border Patrol agents told me is they said the only thing that changed is the human smugglers, the traffickers, now believe that there's an administration in office who will enforce the law, that will deport them if they come here illegally. That one change, the traffickers believing the administration would send them home, dropped illegal immigration 70%. Well, then what happened? Why did we see this enormous deluge we're seeing right now? Well, the answer is the United States Congress put loopholes in the law that mandate the release of children. In a short time frame and under a court decision called the Flores decision, adults with a child get released as well. That process is what's known as catch and release. It means someone who's apprehended is given a court date some months or years into the future and then let go on the hope that they will magically show up. Far too many of them don't show up, but what happened in 2017, in the summer of 2017, is illegal immigrants would pick up the phone and they'd call their friends, they'd call their family back home, and they'd say, you know what? Policy hasn't changed. They still let us go. We still get to stay. There's still no consequences. Come on over. But even worse than that, smugglers learned that bringing a child is the ticket to crossing illegally into this country. The detention facility I saw in the valley, there was a portion of the facility that the officers referred to as daddy daycare because it was simply filled with young single men who had little kids with them. 5 years ago, 2% of single men had kids. Today, 50% of single men have kids because if you grab a little boy or little girl, you can come over, and I'll tell you, because of the loopholes Congress has put in place, Border Patrol has been forced to release people who are convicted murderers, forced to release people who are convicted pedophiles, forced to release adults with sexual assault convictions and children in their custody. Why? Because it is so expedited that by the time they find out about the convictions, they've been forced to release them already. This is cruel, it is inhumane, and when the rapid DNA testing is showing nearly 30% of the adults are not related to the kids, it explains why we're hearing more and more reports of children being rented or sold by the cartels. This has to stop. And the political posturing from Democrats running for president and Democrats in Congress refusing to solve this problem, it is past time for those games. It's time to solve this crisis. I yield the floor.